Everybody, thanks very much for taking the time to join our webinar being hosted by Arganteal. We are here to discuss the automation, orchestration, the capabilities, the operational challenges that we have. On the call, we have our CEO, Steve Kelly, and we have our CTO, Mark Collins. So any questions, any thoughts that you wish to address out on this call, feel free. We have pretty much every angle covered. My name is Pete Gore. I will be presenting the first half. I will be talking about some of the challenges, what automation is, what orchestration is, how you can address the journey as we proceed through, some of the operational challenges that we have to address as part of automation, and the business process pieces that go behind that to ensure that your automation journey is successful. So with that said, so I'm going to start with a definition as much as what is automated orchestration. I like to do this just so that people understand where I'm coming from. I'm always open to a debate, so if you want to, feel free to reach out and make a calendar appointment if you wish to argue the point. But from a perspective of automation or orchestration, automation is typically the ability to perform individual tasks, individual scripts, change a password, change a community string inside a network, small things like that. When you step into orchestration, now you're taking a whole bunch of those individual repetitive tasks and you're stringing them all together. Now, that gets routed for approval. Once approved, the change actually takes place on the network. And from making the change, you can update the ticket, you can update your CMDB, all as part of a consolidated workflow that then allows you to then close out the ticket after the pre-check, post-checks have been made. So, as many of you are aware, because you've taken the time, automation is very key when it comes to business. It allows you to do a lot more with less. And the key aspect here is, I don't think most IT departments are ever told you can have more budget, right? They're always being told you can have a 5% cut, a 10% cut, how you can do more with the same number of people. And so that's where automation, orchestration, and the automation and orchestration platform that you deploy inside your environment becomes highly key. So when you're thinking about this, what are the key business questions that you wish to address, right? So what is it from a business perspective that you're trying to deal with? What are you trying to deliver? Is it improved outcomes? Is it a faster time to market? Is it a higher SLA for your customers? And so understanding what that is, instead of jumping straight to the keyboard, you want to understand what is the business that you're in and what is it that you're trying to do and deliver to your customers? What services are you trying to deliver? So what is the logic behind that? So where do you want to end up, right? What is your ultimate end state? What do you wish to be able to do? And understand that this is not a big bang theory, right? You don't have to press one button and have it all happen in the same go. And that's where the business strategy and the business enablers come into play. Automation maturity, we'll discuss this in a little while. It's key to understand where you are at in that journey, both from an operations perspective, a capabilities perspective, a services perspective. So when I talk about maturity, I don't mean how long have you been in business. I'm talking about where are you at in that journey? What are you looking to do? What level of automation have you managed to deploy? And we'll discuss that in a lot more detail in a few minutes. And then how do you create that strategy? How are you going to get there? What is the plan that you're going to leverage to actually operate against that vision? And so how do you understand that? That's going to tie back to your overall maturity. And again, we'll talk about the fact that each vertical inside your business, be it security, be it compute, be it operations, be it network, can all be at different stages of automation within inside that environment, within inside that strategy, again, depending on what the goal is of what you're trying to deliver from an automation perspective. So with that said, here's a 5-step automation approach, right? So a lot of customers that I speak to are typically in the high 1s, low 2 area. They're very opportunistic. They are reactive in nature, so they're receiving telemetry from the infrastructure in the forms of syslog or other telemetry that's being streamed off of the infrastructure devices, but it's very reactive, right? So it's a meantime to root cause analysis, if you like, of what actually happened, how did it happen, and how do we prevent that in the future, but it's reactive. What we want to do is get to being proactive, being able to receive that information, and that's going to allow you to progress up the maturity ladder into the systematic, into the institutionalized area where you have orchestration that is actually going to react to the telemetry that's coming in. So if you're seeing bad ports, bad network interface cards, bad cables, bad switch ports, security issues across the infrastructure, you want to be able to address those in a systematic manner, in a proactive manner that allows you to actually take effect before it impacts your infrastructure or your organization in a major way. And so the idea here is also the productivity gains as you go through this, right? You're able to increase uptime. You're able to reduce your OpEx because you're allowing the systems to start taking care of your organization and what you're doing inside your organization and how to mitigate issues that allows your infrastructure to stay up, running, and responding to your environment in a way that is going to allow you to keep running your infrastructure and doing what's important to you, which is actually running your business, right? Making sales to customers, keeping, if you're a retail company online, you're able to present your website in a proactive fashion. You're able to continue conducting business. And so, of course, you're going to see productivity gains through this, right? And that's indicated at the bottom. The reason we give ranges here is because every company is different. Your pay scales are different. Your business model is different. But historically, and with the customers I've worked with, the ability to remediate problems, the ability to be proactive allows you to start seeing some of the gains that you see there. By the time you're at level 3, you're probably seeing a 10 to 20% gain across your organization just by deploying these activities or this infrastructure in a way that makes sense for your business. And you're able to now be proactive. So a key aspect here as we drive maturity is also going to be the operations, right? So a lot of customers that we deal with, they think about the keyboards, they think about the switches, the routers, the compute. But the key aspect within inside your organization is how is this organized? How is this operated? How does this tie back to your business process? What are the methodologies of driving this inside your organization? And what is the overall governance of driving this inside your organization? So how do you ensure that what you're doing is going to ensure resiliency across your business? How does it ensure consistent uptime, driving to that elusive age-old 5 nines availability to your customers? And a lot of that's going to be driven, and we talk about how to get started in a few minutes, but how is that's going to be driven by your strategy, by the technology that you choose, by the process changes that you have to make inside your environment. Over the years, I've spoken to a lot of customers where they say, I've got the process, don't you worry. It's like, I've got this. Reality is that if you don't adapt your processes as you deploy automation and as you deploy orchestration inside your environment or AI, et cetera, then you just end up doing bad things faster, right? And so that process and that governance is very key to ensure that what you're doing is happening in the right area of your infrastructure, that it's happening in a repeatable fashion, and that it is understood by those making those changes as to what's actually happening inside their environment. And so operations become a very key aspect of your environment. How do they leverage this, and what are they looking to do, and how do they make the effective changes inside their environment? So how does this resolve to a problem that we can solve for here? Typically, you're going to be using software to make this happen. You're going to be using scripts, right? Be it either you have your own development environment, you have your own developers who are pumping out custom-made things that are suitable to your environment, or you have a COTS package where you've got off-the-shelf environment where you're implementing these environment into your architecture, and this can be done either through off-the-shelf products, or you can have your homegrown, like we just talked about, or you can be leveraging freeware shareware from the internet. And of course, one of the challenges of a freeware shareware that you're pulling down from the internet is security, right? So if you don't have a sandbox, for example, where you're testing different modules that you're pulling in, different capabilities that you're looking to deploy, then you can absolutely drive operational chaos, right? Which is not what we want to do, right? So again, you've got your development. There's a lot of different packages on the internet. I know that you can go and pull. You can pull that into your dev environment. But again, that process, that governance that you have to leverage inside your environment has to be done in a streamlined, consistent fashion that ties back to your governance model. Again, we don't want this chaos inside our environment. We don't want it to introduce problems from a security perspective, and we certainly don't want to introduce problems from an operations perspective where the infrastructure either fails completely or becomes an overall problem to manage, right? We want to make that sure that that's streamlined. And so with that said, from a Wall Street perspective, Wall Street Journal perspective, the operational technical debt of an organization or the industry right now is running at about $1.5 trillion. So what does this mean? Well, it means that it needs to be addressed, right? It means that we need to have a structured strategy around how we're going to address this as an organization, as a company, to ensure that what we're doing is the right thing and that what we're doing is actually improving things and not actually making them worse. From a perspective of how do we translate that $1.5 trillion in technical debt into realistic things? There's 100 million hours, and again, these are backed up by Gartner and various different research and papers. 100 million hours are spent making operational data center changes inside the environment. If you imagine taking your portion of that 100 million hours, applying that to your business environment and saying, okay, what if I can cut that by 10%? What if I can cut that cost by 10%? I've now been able to cut my operational costs down so that I can actually start seeing realistic savings that I can reinvest back into the business. And so a lot of times when you talk to customers about implementing automation, implementing orchestration, their first answer is, I don't have any money. I can't afford it. Well, it's a self-funding model that we're talking about here, is as you start cutting into your OpEx by deploying various automation, and it doesn't have to be big thing. You start small, right? But you start deploying that into your environment, you're going to start seeing that operational cost. And so it becomes a self-funding model where, yes, initially, if you just look for new dollars from your organization, maybe they aren't available. However, as you start cutting those operations expenses, start looking at the software packages that you're running, seeing where the overlaps occur, you're going to start seeing areas of improvement, cost savings that you can then fold back into the business. And again, like I said, it becomes a very self-funding environment. By recreating code, a lot of times we have very enterprising engineers that sit on the infrastructure and think, well, what if I write a script? What if I write a Python script or a Java script or a Perl script that can help me with this, right? That can go out and change those passwords, can go out and change those community strings, can deploy a VM for me or a software package for me. How do I handle that? Again, going back to the security aspect, right? Where is that IP held? Is there version control on that? What's the testing process that I am able to run through to ensure that what I've written is actually going to behave properly across the infrastructure. And a lot of times they're written in mind with that one individual's desire, right? So they're not reusable. They don't become modules that can be reused inside the environment to do the same thing again and again in a repeatable fashion, right? And so the other issue that we're running into here is STEM talent, right? So technical and engineering management are not keeping pace. The need of what we have and the way that the industry is changing is not we're not gathering the resources available. And so there's a hard time out there looking for those individual resources, onboarding them. And of course, because of the shortage of them, they're able to demand higher salaries, higher wages, with inside your environment, which again is going to cost you more money, right? So how do we take some of that operational IP and automate it, put it into an orchestrated fashion, adapt our processes to ensure that what we have is not only repeatable, it's proactive, and it doesn't necessarily require me to go out and hire a whole bunch of highly trained engineers to make sure that I can now operate my environment. All of this sums up to a lot of wasted time. Also a lot of wasted talent, right? You hire a lot of this high-level talent and they spend their time doing mediocre type work across the infrastructure, right? So day-to-day operational type stuff that needs to be done, but can absolutely be automated and absolutely save and allow that person to then operate at their full potential, doing far more high priority things across the infrastructure. So typically at this point, I would pause for questions, but if you can either put your questions in the chat, we have Kristen online who's monitoring our chat. More than happy to address some questions as they come in. So yeah, feel free to throw them in the chat and we will address those either at the end or as we go. So let's start thinking about that problem statement. How do we start working through, how do we make it so that we are going to be successful, right? I've hopped on the whole benefit of reducing OpEx, optimizing your workforce, optimizing the capacity of your workforce and your infrastructure. But how do we start getting there, right? So we have to start thinking about automating services across our environment, start automating repetitive tasks. Again, those passwords, those community strings, IP address deployments, platform deployments, right? Where you start getting into doing zero touch provisioning or device onboarding and doing it in a manner that is repeatable. Start talking about those operational processes and how we can start leveraging those, right? All of this is going to start looking at how you can reduce your OpEx and how you can start optimizing and leveraging your workforce in a much more efficient fashion. So then how do we start broadening that out from the point where you not only have operational expenditures, but now you're starting to drive service improvements. You're starting to improve agility. You're able to start turning up sites in a much faster fashion, right? Some businesses are out there. Think about the Olympics that were going on right now. A lot of companies had to go and deploy infrastructure out of the Olympics in Paris, which if you're based in the US, that's again a challenge, right? How do I set up my internet? How do I drive that environment? How do I make sure that I've got the appropriate change management processes in place? Again, talking about the process pieces here, right? So instant management, what do I do if things go wrong? All that ties back to the agility. All of that is going to start tying back to services and how happy are your staff and your customers and how easy is it to use your environment, right? Do you have a service catalog that they can go pull services from so that, again, your IT staff are able to be freed up to go focus on more complex issues and you're still satisfying the customer's needs, right? How do you do simple things like patch management? Many of you are probably thinking back to the recent Microsoft issue that we had. How do you go out and patch your servers in a consistent fashion, all your desktops in a consistent fashion that you're able to then also roll back in issues where there is a problem with that, right? So you want to think about patch management and changes to your infrastructure, not only from a, hey, I got it done, But what if the patch went wrong? Or what if it was a repeatable patch that you needed to roll out? How do you handle that, right? Again, in a repeatable fashion, risk-free, fully tested. You want to make sure that your network is doing the same things afterwards that it was doing prior, right? So you want to be implementing pre-checks and post-checks, especially from a network perspective. If you think about it from a simple perspective, you make a change on your network, you want to make sure that the routes in the routing table are the same routes that should have been there after your change as were there before, right? Connectivity, being able to test for connectivity in an automated fashion so that the people that you have are able to call and end their maintenance window and confidently go to bed instead of, like many of us, as you can tell, I've been around a while. Instead of getting that emergency call at 4 o'clock in the morning saying, hey, something's not broken or something is broken, this database isn't reachable, and having to pull everybody back out of bed and get them online. Being able to check that ahead of time as part of your maintenance window is a key aspect here. And then when we start getting into the more critical changes, right, we start talking about orchestration, the workflow capabilities. So how do you then tie everything together from a DevSecOps perspective, right? How do I deploy things into multi-clouds? How do I do an application build? If I'm a retailer with an online presence and it's Christmas, right, and everybody's hitting your website, and so all of a sudden your infrastructure is buckling under the pressure, this is a good thing to have. But how do you handle it so that the sites don't crash, right? You want to orchestrate the ability to turn up new load balancers, new web servers, and do that in an agile fashion, which will then give your website's capabilities to be able to keep processing the telemetry that needs to be going on, and the ability to process orders and get that out there, right? Again, business agility, observability. So you're wanting that telemetry to come from the infrastructure in a way that you're able to react to it in a proactive fashion so that you don't suddenly be sitting there on Monday morning going, what happened? We had a lot of people. It's like, yeah, but the infrastructure didn't keep pace, right? You can fix that with orchestration in a way that allows you to be agile, allows you to spin up additional resources to ensure that your business is successful. That requires telemetry across your organization. That requires the ability to perform analytics and understand what is happening, when it's happening, have thresholds. All of that comes from your strategy. All of that comes from your plan and the ability to react to that in a proactive fashion. So you're all sitting there going, that's great, Pete. How do I make this happen? So let's talk about how we get this started. Well, first of all is the vision, right? So what is the vision? Going back to the business questions that we want to ask ourselves. What is it we want out of this delivery model? What is it do we want out of this fantastic new technology that's going to save the world, right? What is the direction? Where do we want to go? Where do we want to start, right? If I was to give you a big red easy button, where do I want to start? What is the thing that I want to look at, right? So that's the vision, right? How do we set that? Where do we want to go? Where do we want to end up? And then the objectives. So how do I take that vision and break it into steps that are achievable for our organization? Again, this is not a sprint, right? This is a journey. As we saw in the maturity model, this is absolutely a journey that we need to take as we step forwards, right? So how am I going to do that? What is the most important thing? And typically when I go talk to customers, there's the three top use cases across their organization that everybody at some point becomes a nodding dog and says, yes, I would love to be able to fix that. And that's going to be device onboarding, the ability to remotely turn up a device or a site, replace items at a remote site so that I don't have to ship people or fly people out there into the data center, just be able to ship a device with the appropriate instructions and have somebody just go plug that device in. The infrastructure will see it, bring it up, bring it on board, document your IP addresses, update your CMDB, document serial numbers, right, in a truly automated fashion. From there, we have software image management, again, talking about patch management across your infrastructure, both compute, security devices, network devices, right? So how do we make that happen? And then compliance, right? So how do I avoid configuration drift across my infrastructure? How do I ensure that from an infrastructure perspective, if I'm subject to SOX compliance or things like that, that my infrastructure is actually meeting those requirements, right? Those are the top three use cases I've seen across 99.9% of the customers that I've interacted with. Give that a thought. If you think that's relevant, then we can absolutely have a deeper conversation after the call to action. But so that's one of our first things that we need to do, define those objectives, right? Now we're going to define the strategy. Strategy is key. And a strategy is not, hey, I want to automate everything. That's not a strategy, guys, right? That is an objective. A strategy is the overall approach that I'm going to take. And in a future webinar, we'll break down how to define that strategy for you. What is the roadmap to defining that strategy? How do we create it? What are the things that we want to do? And it takes into account the objectives, the direction. But how do we define it? Where do we want to go? How do we want to get there? So on and so forth, right? And then the actions. So what are the steps that I'm going to take, right? How am I actually going to get there as I go about doing this, right? So, you know, what are the baby steps that I need to take? What is the actions that I need to do? Who do I need to do it? When do I need to do it? Etc. Right? So thinking through those things is also going to be key so that you're not just running away with it, right? You're not just ad hoc, jump on a keyboard, but you're operating against a plan that is deliverable, that is agile. Again, we're going to be wanting to leverage an agile delivery model here, not necessarily a waterfall model, because you want to see improvements as you go, right? You want to be able to report that up to the board, to your senior management, to your senior leadership, and you want to see improvements. You want to see those OPEX savings as you go. And again, referring back to the ability to self-fund these projects as you go. So planning is going to be absolutely key here. Okay. So how do I go about doing this, right? How do I get started on this overall journey? So the sufficient time, again, this is not a rush, right? Be inclusive. Think about all of your different verticals that you have to look at, right? Again, we're not looking at waterfall here. We're looking at agile. Be agile, be able to break it down, be able to see those incremental changes as you make them. Start small. Again, don't try and boil the ocean, right? If you want to think about software image management, you want to think about password changes, you want to think about community string changes, start small. Think about, how am I going to make these changes? What are the process changes that I need to make? How do I write the overall scripts? Or, you know, leverage the platform that I'm actually going to leverage, right? And again, do not automate bad processes. You don't want to be doing bad things faster, right? It's not a good look. It's not a good way of making this happen, right? Over on the far right, you see a chart on how you actually look at your automation journey, right? This chart is a little small. Otherwise, you'd be able to see that yellow line. There's actually a hump here. And that's one thing to realize as you get started on this overall journey. There is a boost, or there is an increase in cost. There has to be, right? Because you have to make the overall initial investment before you start seeing the OPEX savings and the CAPEX savings inside your environment. So there will be a boost, but then as you can see, the costs then start to drop, right? Your margins start to improve. Hopefully, depending on the type of business you're in, your revenue will increase. But this will allow you, again, as part of your strategy and your vision, you identify the pain points, you look at the processes that you're leveraging, you start looking at your ROI. When do I start seeing that break-even point, right? And again, this all goes into your business plan and your business vision. You're going to want to make a proof of concept. Obviously, you're not going to take this and deploy straight into production, right? You want to make sure it works. You want to make sure that it integrates. You want to make sure that the APIs that you've chosen to leverage from the different platforms and the tools that you've leveraged are doing what they're supposed to do. They're not interacting in a good way or in a bad way, sorry. So you want to make sure that you're in there. The other key thing here is, as part of your overall strategy and your vision, you want to consider, how am I actually going to do this? Am I going to do it DIY? Am I going to hire a whole bunch of developers and move forward in a DIY fashion? Do I want to do it turnkey, where I'm literally bringing somebody in, they do it all for me, and and then hand me the keys, which is very similar to outcome as a service, right? You hire a third-party vendor, they're going to come in there. You don't have to be involved in any way, shape, or form. As they walk out, they hand you the keys, they hand you a piece of paperwork and say, call me if you've got a problem. And then my preferred methodology for most customers is the build, operate, transfer, where you do hire expertise to come in and help you build it, but they build it alongside you. They help you develop that strategy. They help you understand how to execute against those objectives. But at the same time, your resources are there. Your organization is there to understand what's being done, how it's being done, any potential changes that need to be made along the way that needs to happen. So build, operate, transfer, I think, in my opinion, is the best way to go. And then also think about, are you leveraging open source platforms? Are you leveraging different frameworks? Are you leveraging different off-the-shelf products, things like that? So yeah, all things that you need to consider, and all things that we can absolutely dig into at a later date. One of the key things here, one of my favorite statements, is automation decimation here. If you don't do the processes, then you will have problems along the way. And again, your problems will appear at the speed of code. So kind of coined the term automation decimation. There's me standing there in front of everything kind of going, what happened? Why didn't that work? Oh my goodness, right? And so I'm no longer failing at a single router level or a single switch level or a single server level. I'm now potentially failing at a very large scale because something wasn't tested properly. The failbacks weren't written properly. My post checks didn't catch something, or my pre-checks didn't catch something along that way. So that's very important to think about as well. When we think about successful projects, again, I know I've harped on this a lot, but people, process, and tools. Tools being last, right? Think about your people, think about the processes, think about what you want to achieve, then think about the tools that you're going to be looking at and pulling into your environment. This doesn't mean that everything has to be done in a serial fashion. Absolutely, you can get started in a tactical fashion. Once you know what your strategy is and once you know where you're going, then absolutely that's some of the things that you start thinking about. To give you a brief picture from an implementation strategy, again, hopefully this ties into what I've already talked about. From a strategic imperatives, what am I wanting to do? What is the objective here that I'm looking to do? I design it, I build it, I test it. Then I look at taking that foundation. It's a quick win, right? We're starting small. What is the use case that I'm looking at? Again, keep it simple, right? Use case, do a proof of value, deploy it, right? Again, use case, proof of value, deploy. Incremental wins that we go out there. And then once we've proven that out, the business is now starting to see that productivity gain. We can now scale that out. We can scale that across the industry, right? We can launch it, we can operate it, turn it over to our operations team, and start that loop that we get into. All right. So from there, again, take the learnings that you're looking for, right? Absolutely everything that you do, again, as we scale it out, take those learnings, apply them to the business, apply the governance, apply the oversight, and proceed back through operation A and continue out, right? This is how you're going to scale your environment, and this is how you're going to scale across that journey. Steve, we can skip the next slide. Skip this one. All right, so just from a closing thought. Yeah, so just a closing thought perspective. As you go through this, I know I've said we need to start on the business before we ever think about the technology. The reality is that this is going to be dependent upon your business, right? There is going to be business planning. It can be tactical to get started, and then you can go and start doing some task automation and across the way. This is how you're going to see incremental gains, right, to your infrastructure. This is how you're going to start seeing operational expenditure savings, right, to lower your OPEX. But that doesn't mean that just because you've jumped into tech does not mean that you don't go back to your business, right? That's where the strategy piece comes in. That's where the planning piece comes in. So the reality is it's not going to be a straight line. It's going to be a crooked line as you go through. The idea here is if you've developed your vision, your strategy, your objectives, and your plan, you have that light at the end of the tunnel that you're marching towards. And that is exactly what we want you to be doing to achieve what you want to achieve and be successful for your business. Okay, at this point, I'm going to turn it over to our CEO, Steve, and he's going to talk about Arganteal.
Gee, sorry.
That's okay.
Hi, I'm Steve Kelly. I'm the CEO and a founder of Arganteal. And we have I think a large piece of something that you can do the automation journey that Pete's talking about. I'm going to reprise one slide here. Data center software. Everybody's kind of familiar with Agile as an agile process as opposed to waterfall. That applies to the development side of code, but often, and most often, it leads to operational chaos on security and operational issues, which really Agile doesn't directly address. That's what Arganteal has concentrated on, simply said, the ops side of DevOps. As we said earlier, in March, the Wall Street Journal put out an article saying there's 1.5 trillion in operational technical debt that needs to be addressed. So if I make my team more efficient, I'm not going to be laying off people. There's work getting left behind every day. Yeah, we think 100 billion hours a year, that may be low, but it's at least that big. And why? Well, because the code is manual. And it isn't even thought about as being reusable. You need 10 different APIs to build a stack, and each of those is probably scripted with a different language and maybe a different tool depending on which vendor you're working with. And then each script, even if you've made it sort of repeatable, has to have the target information input to it manually, and there just isn't enough talent around to keep pace with this. We have cases with the government where people are actually dying on the job because the code is old and there's no one new to work on the new code. Countless hours could be saved, and that has been our mission. A little bit more about that, just so you see the size of the problem. There's hundreds of scripting languages. We are scripting language agnostic, so we deal with that. That results in hundreds of different libraries of stuff that you can choose from to do a job. And each of the cloud platforms has 20, 30 little pieces. And this graph in the middle sort of shows how they're equivalent. But if I learn the AWS stuff, I'm not able to do anything on Azure. If I learn the Oracle stuff, I'm not really able to do anything on Google. So there's a problem with hybrid cloud. There are platform scripts that we're kind of familiar with all over the place. And then there are bare metal scripts. An example of that is the script to fix the CrowdStrike problem was a bare metal script, meaning it needed to be applied locally. That's sort of a hidden asset. We have managed to pull all of that together into one, okay, it says solution, but one platform called Adept. And that's Adaptive Deployment Toolkit, where you can deal with this huge variety of stuff. And as Pete described, you not only have a huge variety of stuff, you have a huge variety of approaches you're going to take to get there. What we've tried to do is build a platform that allow you to be flexible and get that done. Talked a little bit about Adept. It is problem agnostic. It is platform agnostic, and it is language agnostic. It was introduced in 2023. It's got 5 years of development in it, so you're probably not going to want to go do this yourself. A good part of the development was funded by the Air Force, and there are 4 patents issued on what we're doing, so we have some instance that it's fairly unique. It was inspired by a project we were involved in at Cisco. They were deploying unified communications across thousands of devices in Europe. They built the whole thing once and got paid to do so. They had to build it all over from scratch because of problems in the operational software. And they didn't keep the scripts. The scripts they had written were not reusable and they were not saved. So all of that started over. And the second time they didn't get paid for it. Countless man hours consumed in recreation. And we kind of said, there's got to be a better way to this. The operational tasks have to be automatable. Today, we have one other product I'll touch on, and that's Ascot software, automated script capture of ontology and taxonomy. If ontology and taxonomy scares you, just realize that when you see those words, it probably is associated with some form of AI/ML. And in our case, that's mostly machine learning. It will, if you give us the information, let us go out and target stuff in your environment and collect all the scripts that are out there that might be useful in the future, but are just laying around in the past. We like to kid that that'll work from COBOL to Kubernetes. And if you know what those words mean, that's from something in the 50s to something pretty modern. We added that to our product base in 2024 based on customers saying, yeah, but we don't know where this stuff is. And we can also provide professional services for either product to help that getting started. But if you want us to go do collection of scripts, that's a good place to pull it together. Then we classify those scripts using ML and tell you what they were for and make them searchable so that you can find out which ones you might want to reuse. And that's kind of the goal of Ascot. Then it feeds Adept and off you go. Why Adept? Well, it's a platform that's very flexible. It'll deal with any cloud platform, public or private. So you see VMware up there. It'll deal with any operating system. And by the way, if there's some that we don't have up here, we can always add them if they need to be. But in general, it's just the nature of the slide. There's all these technologies out there, Rancher, Docker, Kubernetes. It will deal with those. Cisco, tons of Cisco. And maybe the most important thing about getting your team to be willing to try to use this platform is it is language agnostic. So whatever scripting languages your guys are used to using, they don't have to change. And most of the other tools out there, step one is to go rewrite the script in their language or their domain specific language. We have done a ton of work. That's probably half the development to make it such that you can bring the scripting languages you already use and you can bring 4 or 5 of them and we'll make them work together without making people change and start over. So that's a quick, that's what Adept is about. What we would like to do is continue this conversation with you guys. You can tell from Pete's presentation that he has a lot of depth and background based on his experience with Cisco. I would suggest you may want to have a phone call with him to kind of talk about the specifics of where you are in your organization. Obviously, we can't do that in front of everybody. And so one thing we can do as a follow-up to this meeting, and we'll reach out to you and try to get these going, is meet with Pete Gore and have him go into a little more detail of your specific situation, or you go into a little more detail of your specific situation. And then if you're ready to take a look at Adept and understand the tool, which I think we've shown has the flexibility to deal with wherever you are starting in your automation journey. Jason McDaniel, one of our senior engineers, can take you through a demo, one of which is taking you through a Patch Tuesday demo. There are others we can do and show you Adept and Ascot. And to do that, hit info.arganteal.com and we'll go get that organized. That's what we wanted to cover today. Hope we've spent your time well, and thank you. Please endeavor to follow up with us in one of the ways or other ways that we suggested.